Hi! We've got Gladys joining us today.
So we're having an event today and we thought it would be a good chance to explore the question, what does it mean to be Chinese?
A very complex question.
No one has answers.
Yeah, whether it's ethnically based on DNA, or is it culturally based on, you grew up in this environment and you learn the practices and you practice them actively, or like it's a kind of in between the two.
It's quite difficult because you could say Chinese as in a Chinese national from China, ethnic Chinese, or even like just Chinese culture. So one word with many meanings. And we thought we'll interview the people here today and see what they have before we resume our discussion.
Yeah, okay, let's go. Okay, so Gladys, what does being a Chinese mean to you?
I think it changed over the years. Like when you were young, you're just like, that's your race, right? And then when you're older, it's kind of, it's to different people, it probably has different levels of meaning. Maybe someone who is more into the culture, it means something else than someone who's just on the passport, the race is Chinese. Yeah. So I think it probably varies from person to person. That's my take.
So it's very subjective in that sense.
Yes.
So like you can't really fault someone who feel that they are Chinese but the others do not feel so, and vice versa.
Yeah, because it's basically how they're brought up, what is their environment, what they've been exposed to. So you can't really blame someone for not having the opportunity to have all this.
So what do you think is Chinese to you?
I think this question is the way I interpret this question. It's a very nuanced but potentially controversial subject. I think we need to be able to distinguish between being ethnically Chinese, like racially Chinese, nationally Chinese, and the Chinese language versus the Chinese identity. For example, speaking English does not make you any more English than, say, an Englishman. Just as speaking Mandarin or speaking Chinese, or any of the Chinese languages, but not necessarily Mandarin, make you any more or less Chinese. In my mind, being Chinese, first of all, is a question of your racial identity or the ethnicity to which you belong. And this can be expressed through customs, this can be expressed through your own language, but the mode in which you express your ethnicity or identity may or may not make you any more or less Chinese. Speaking, for example, I'm a Cantonese, so technically speaking, if you ask us 1,500 years ago whether we are Chinese, people would probably consider us southern barbarians. But and then we would consider the north barbarians. So the question of being Chinese is it's shifting all the time. I think that it really depends on the customs, the time you're in, and what you personally identify as.
So Nicholas, what does it mean to be Chinese?
Well, I think it's a very complicated question, right? Because in terms of cuisine and certain practices, I think we are very Chinese in Singapore, but also we are the diaspora, so I think we don't really identify with what China is today and their practices there. So I think it's really a construct. And we have to, in a way, reclaim Chineseness because we can't let anybody own it.
Everyone has picked up the point that there's culturally Chinese, there's racially the ethnicity, and there's also nationality. And I think for me, as someone who grew up in a very Western language environment, I always consider it as just like racially Chinese in that sense. But I also
I never really questioned all these different types of identities. I guess also partly because we grew up in a majority Chinese environment, we have this privilege of not really questioning and taking for granted that it's our
you can just think
identity.
we're Chinese.
Yeah, but the thing is, I also realize that a lot of people amongst us, we are racially Chinese, but we're not culturally Chinese. But we assume that we are Chinese, like 100% Chinese, and like, even though a lot of us don't speak very good Chinese and can't read properly and have no access to the history, that came before us, what made us what we are today, but we still consider us Chinese. And so sometimes I question, like, would I be considered Chinese
by other
by other people? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there was one point I think after I just moved back to Singapore from Japan where I questioned like how Chinese I was in the sense that if I speak Japanese more fluently and I did my uni and therefore know more about Japanese culture as it is now and the language better, then how Chinese am I given that my Chinese is not great, I've never lived in China, I don't play any Chinese instruments or do any of the traditional arts, and where does that make me? You know, like you think of, I think one I was like Paul Esbach, who wrote The Good Earth. She was raised, she's a missionary, she was raised in China, and she really had a very strong love of the language and very deep ties to the people there. And would we consider her Chinese? It's like nowadays, I think. It's
Yeah, like, and would you accuse her of cultural appropriation had she be
writing The Good Earth now?
Yeah,
because
so-
The Good Earth was about a Chinese family and you know the life of a Chinese man, and
They
she
made
was
it
a
into a
white woman.
Hollywood film,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then
yeah.
they didn't want Anna May Wong as the actress, which became like an issue
Different thing.
today as well. Yeah.
So there was that. There's also another story I read. I can't find it now. It was a guy who found out he had Scottish ancestry and he went to Scotland and was so enthusiastic, but pretty much got told, "Hey, dude, you're American." So what makes someone Chinese?
And who is the one who decides, right? Like,
Yeah.
if we accuse someone of not being Chinese, then we naturally feel that we are the one
more-
who define. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
more Chinese.
But there'll be
Maybe.
people in China who are growing up, you know, speaking Chinese, even
and
more.
they will feel that we are not Chinese.
Yes, they'll be like,
enough.
we live in China.
Yeah.
This is where it is all from.
And growing up also, there was this period in my teenagehood where I feel ashamed of being Chinese. I will say, oh, I can't speak Chinese, very proudly. And because growing up, I went to a Chinese school and, you know, the Anglo schools will actually call us communists and all this. So as a teenager, you want to blend in and you want to be cool. So I started rejecting that part of my Chinese culture.
But at the same time, I feel like we are Chinese, but we're not Chinese. You know, like we have, even within ourselves as diaspora, graded each other according to like your level of Chineseness. Like, are you I suppose it's really by how much in touch with the culture. If you're very in touch with the culture, you become like too Chinese and therefore uncool versus like the Chinese people who are westernized. That means those that speak English as a first language know more Hollywood than they do J-Cho and or like Chinese movies, and therefore they are like cooler and more modern or more progressive in that sense. You know? I feel like there was a gradient back then.
Oh, that's that back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said back then
Back
because
then, back
it
then.
sounded like
No, now
something
it's
that
different.
wow, you said that. Did you
No,
really say that?
Now it's different. Now like
Progressive.
Chinese culture.
Whoa, remember that saga recently about
Yes,
progressiveness?
yes.
Or
Shaking hands.
yeah. Yeah, I think we define a lot by how the Western world perceived us just about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And right now I think Asians like developing countries, so to speak, we are getting a lot more confident about our cultural identity. But sometimes it can get to the other extreme where you're overcompensating and becomes a bit of like
Reactionary.
nationalistic
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always striking that kind of balance. Yeah.